welcome to Business Questions. In this episode, I'm talking to Leor Franks, who's going to be talking about the favourability journey. It's a fascinating principle where Leor's going to talk to us really the journey that someone takes from becoming completely unaware of your business, your brand or your product to the point where they actually give you money and they buy it. So hugely interesting for absolutely every business. And I know from chatting from Leor briefly before we started recording, this is going to be a really, really good one. Leor, welcome to Business Questions.
Hi, David. Thank you very much for having me.
Oh, an absolute pleasure. I know it's a Friday afternoon here. We're looking forward to the weekend, but I think we've always got time for learning, and the film's going to be here for years to come. So really good you're motivated to talk. Lovely to see that enthusiasm in you and your passion that from what you're talking about, it really has come through in our sort of pre-conversation. Leor, tell people, what is the favourability journey?
Thank you very much, David. So the Favourability Journey is a toolkit for thinking about where your customers are with you today and where you want them to be. It's about creating a series of marketing and business development strategies to turn people who aren't aware of your brand into loyal customers. But before perhaps I start talking about how it works mechanically, maybe I can set it in some context.
Yeah.
I think when you're thinking about business development marketing, you need to think about the goals of the business, where the business ultimately wants to go to. And the goals are then followed by strategies. I say strategies in plural because there could be more than one marketing or BD strategy you want to employ to achieve those goals. But following on from those strategies are a series of specific objectives that a business might want to achieve with their marketing. And how do you put those objectives into practice? Through tactics. So the toolkit I'm talking about is the GSOT toolkit: goals, strategies, objectives, and tactics. And to bring that to life with an example, I'm not a mad keen golfer, but I've seen people play golf in one of two ways. The first option is you go onto the clubhouse terrace and you look around the course. You look at the holes, the 18 holes in front of you, and you think about how you're going to play. And you go to the first tee and you drive, and wherever the ball lands, you think about how you're going to take your next shot, and you get it onto the green and you take care in putting, and eventually you hold the ball. And you go around systematically and methodologically thinking about your approach and trying to improve hole after hole. So that for me is a planned approach. The other option is to get a huge, great bag of balls, chuck them on the clubhouse terrace and just whack them around and hope one of them goes straight in a hole. I mean, that's obviously nuts. It's bananas. People don't do that in golf generally, but sometimes you see people do that in marketing because they aren't clear about their business goals. They haven't outlined the strategies. They're just focused on tactics. So for me, start with the goals, build the strategies, define the objectives, and then put the tactics in place. So that's my overriding philosophy, and I use the Favourability Journey to bring the strategy piece to life.
Fantastic. I think that golf analogy is absolutely brilliant. It explains it very, very well and very succinctly, and something perhaps we should all take a mental note of. So a company approaches you. What steps do you take to help them? What's the process?
Good question. So I encourage people to think about where their clients are today and where they want them to be. And that is the favourability journey that I take people on. And for me, it's 4 R's: recognition, reputation, relationships, and revenue. And if you'll indulge me with another silly anecdote, cast your mind back to before lockdown when we could travel internationally, get on a plane, perhaps go and meet clients. So imagine this: you are abroad, you're meeting a client for a drink, you're in the hotel bar waiting for the client. You don't recognize any of the drinks in the bar, you're not familiar with the language, but you're sitting at the bar looking at the shelf, and there are 40 bottles on the shelf behind you. The problem is you don't have any recognition of those brands. You're at the first stage of the favourability journey. Without recognition, how can you possibly pick from the 40 to buy the one that you want to entertain your client with? You just can't unless you go for a potluck approach. But let's say you look more carefully and you realize that maybe 10 of the 40 are from a region that you've heard of. That gives you a bit of comfort, so you can narrow the 40 down to 10. But look, 10 is still a huge range to choose from. So you look more carefully at the labels of these 10 bottles, and you realize that 10 of them have a logo on them, an award logo. And that gives you some sense of quality or caliber. And you can start to narrow down to those that seem to have the right set of credentials, the awards that appeal to you. So let's say you've got 5 now where you know their reputation, which is the second stage of the favourability. Based on those awards, you're comfortable that some are better than others. But without any further data, 5 is still pretty tough to make an educated selection from. Suddenly the bartender walks in. You have a chat to the bartender, you build a relationship with him or her, you trust them. You're at the third stage of the favourability journey, relationships. So based on the advice from this trusted bartender, the bartender says to you, David, look, there are 2 you should go for that fit with your particular tastes. One is $25 a bottle. The other is $250. Now, for me, the decision's already made based on those pricing options. But let's say you're a highly paid partner in a professional services firm meeting a big time client, and that's a reasonable amount of money to spend, $250. You now have to do a calculation. How much do you want to impress your client? What about anti-bribery rules? Are you going to get good value for money if you buy the more expensive one? So you're now at the 4th stage of this journey, the favourability journey, the revenue stage. Look, it's a silly story, going into a bar, looking at the shelf, figuring out which have got awards, talking to the bartender, looking at the pricing. But genuinely, you might go on that journey in a bar overseas. I also think realistically, it's the journey that clients go on with any brand, and particularly in my area in professional services with law firms and accounting firms. The journey goes from a position where they haven't heard of us, where they don't have recognition, to the point where you can build evidence of your reputation, start to actually meet people and cultivate relationships, and ultimately make some revenue through the right sales pitch. So I encourage my colleagues and my teams to think about clients where they are on that journey, to get the relevant information to understand how the client feels about us, and then to plot specific objectives and tactics to move the client along the journey, always bearing in mind the ultimate goals of the business, which we're there to serve. So that's the favourability journey: recognition, reputation, relationships, and revenue. And it creates for you the strategies that fit within the earlier framework I described: goals, strategies, objectives, and tactics. And if you do that right, you might not get a hole in one, but at least you'll be able to improve your handicap.
Absolutely. So would you ordinarily work alongside a marketing agency to implement the strategy, or would you work as just as a consultant coming in and doing it solo?
It's a good question. So, I mean, I've now had 5 director roles where I've worked within an organization in-house as a director of BD and marketing. I'm now with a law firm by the name of Kingsley Napley, which is a leading London-based international firm. And I tend to take responsibility myself as the director of marketing and BD for coming up with the strategies in line with the business goals. And sometimes I need to help the business clarify and codify those goals. But when we get to the point where we're developing objectives and tactics, that's when I bring in consultants or agencies. I mean, if I was working in an organization where we had a team of hundreds of marketing and BD people, you might not need the extra resource, the extra skills of external advisors. But when you're working at smaller firms without hundreds of staff, there is a huge value sometimes to having external counsel, whether it's on particular technical specialisms like communications, or people with real expertise in advertising or messaging. So, I mean, to summarize, I tend to take personal responsibility as a director of marketing for the strategy, and I bring in agencies to help me with the tactics where we don't have the bench strength internally.
Yeah, fantastic. And I think that's just a great way to actually go. I think bringing in the outside consultants is very much a common theme in all the people that I'm speaking to. It's having people who can offer that knowledge as and when they actually, when they need it all. Do you have any sort of real life examples of the journey, of the favourability journey, and how long does the process take generally, and what sort of interesting things have you discovered on the way which has made you change the direction of your marketing?
Yeah, really good question, David. So I'll use an example, if I may, from one of my previous roles. I was working for a consulting firm, and we had been looking at the market, and we realized that a number of our competitors were starting to offer a particular service. I won't bore you with the details, but it wasn't something that we were known for. We had no recognition as players in that market, even though we actually had some of the world's leading experts in that field internally. And we looked at our business plan and quickly came to the conclusion that if we didn't try and win some market share quickly, the only way we'd ever be in that market is if we went and bought a business, which is obviously a very expensive thing to do. So I was given the mission over a 1 calendar year period as part of our annual business planning cycle to try and create a scenario where we had no recognition in the market, but we'd move clients to the point where we'd actually win some revenue. So I began by looking at the market itself, commissioning a survey from one of the big media houses who had a big database of relevant customers, looking at their awareness of the market players, looking at the particular needs they had. We used that data to put together some messages for our marketing, for our communications, for business development. And we created I'm going to use the word marketing campaign, which I know not everyone likes, but a specific time-bound campaign to move clients along the journey. And there were a whole series of tactics within that around building recognition through advertising, through appearing on the relevant websites and search engines. Next, looking at our reputation, evidencing the insights and caliber and quality of our in-house experts through media appearances, through writing articles. Content is very important in my industry. So there was a lot of effort and time put into commissioning content, sometimes using external writers to ghostwrite pieces for us. And once we had that bench strength of content, we used that content to try and encourage clients to come and meet us through webinars, through face-to-face events, to build those relationships at the third stage of my favorability journey, which is all fairly normal standard marketing behavior in professional services. But the key for me to help the business make revenue in that short period of time was the fourth stage of the journey, the revenue stage, which some people would call business development. So the final element of our campaign was turning those relationships that we'd created through the content at events into potential clients, frankly, by calling them, emailing them, asking them to meet with us. And the offer was, come and talk to us. We'll share with you some real granular insights from that thought leadership that weren't in the white paper. We'll give you and your team a custom bespoke presentation on the real secret sauce that we've discovered. And about 30% of the people who had downloaded our white paper were willing to take that meeting, which was a very high return. So that gave our people with a large range of customers to go out and meet, to make those presentations. And we were successful in winning quite a large number of assignments in year one. So it was a time-bound campaign based on the need to try and win share before our competitors really owned the market. And it was all about having an integrated process across marketing, comms, and business development, again, using this model, favorability journey, recognition, reputation, relationships, and revenue.
So in the content marketing, that was there to establish yourselves as the experts within your fields. You mentioned you created a lot of content. Can you give some sort of, for a smaller business, how much, and it shouldn't just be content, it actually has to be valuable content, especially in terms of the SEO factor. Google wants to provide searchers with the answers to their problems. So, it's got to be quite specific, very relevant to the people. But as a large organization, how many pieces of content would you be creating? And are they generally short or long form, or is it a mixture of those?
Really good question. So I really think horses for courses, a mixture depending on the resources you have, the markets you're in, the time that you have available to you. And the other thing, of course, to bear in mind is the preferences of the market you're seeking to address. I've seen some excellent pieces of content produced in fairly short timescales without a lot of money spent that just don't land with the audience because they're the wrong format. One of the firms I worked at a few years ago, we had a big content production machine. I saw a lovely piece of content, which was about 50 pages put together and put out to market. But the audience we were trying to reach, who demographically were, I don't want to use the phrase millennials, but of a particular generation working in a certain type of industry, they didn't want to read 50 pages of close type content. What they wanted was a couple of pages of infographics with the key points called out. And we'd completely failed in that situation to think of the audience preferences. We did have a great idea. We really understood the client issue. But ultimately, as marketeers, as communicators, we need to think about what our customers want and how they prefer to consume information. And that situation, we'd failed. And if I give you one other thought on the point of content, I've developed a model over the years for producing content that resonates with clients. I call it the content tree. If you will imagine for a second a tree, we think of it as 5 stages. The first stage are the seeds. And the seeds for me are the essence of the idea, the things that are keeping clients awake at night. The seeds then grow into some shoots. The shoots for me are a very simple summary of the argument of your piece of content, the hypothesis, if you will, what the problem is, what the solution is. And that's great. You can validate that, you can test that. If you get buy-in, the next thing to do is to really evidence the hypothesis with what I call roots. And the roots is the evidence, the data, some research, market analysis, whatever it is that allows you to thoroughly test the hypothesis and draw some conclusions that are of value. The 4th stage is the trunk, a really solid body of content, whether it's a white paper or an infographic or whatever it is, that takes the data from your roots and turns it into something consumable by the market. And the 5th stage of this tree is the branches, or the leaves, if you will, the things that actually are visible and go out there. And they are, for me, the channels to market, the marketing tactics that you might want to employ. So it's 5 stages. The first is the seeds, the client issue. The second is the shoots, the initial formulation of the hypothesis. The third is the roots, the meaty evidence. 4th is the trunk, the body of work. And the 5th is the branches, the way you get it out to market. But the final thought on this is you can't just plant the seeds and hope for the best. You have to think about the branches, the leaves, the channels at the beginning. Because as I said earlier on, if you don't think about how your customers want to receive information, you can have the sturdiest tree in the world, but no flowers will grow because customers won't want to pollinate your flowers. I'm sorry, I've gone too far with the analogy now, haven't I?
No, that's absolutely fine. And the other thing, I think that's what I've always understood to be important when you're creating content is actually if you've created for a 1,000 word article, there's actually lots of micro bits in there which you can use numerous times across the relevant platforms. It might be a sentence, a quote going on Twitter, or there may be an infographic you can then produce for Instagram. Is that something which holds true for you?
Yeah, absolutely. And some of my colleagues will call it chunking, breaking down the key insights, the key points of information into various nuggets that you can then disseminate through different channels. And sometimes that's a series of data points that you can put together in a nice infographic. Sometimes it's a couple of quotes from the piece, either from clients, reference sources, or from your own analysis. Again, though, you have to think about the channel. You have to think about what looks best and resonates and will attract attention. So for me, if you're using social media, for example, I like to see some visuals, but with some data in there. Yeah. So I see a lot of social media posts with lovely pictures of people, but they don't really give me anything. Sure, I might find the person interesting to look at, but what do they tell me about the content? So my preference with that chunked approach is if you've got a key statistic, put it in the post with a nice little pie chart and a graphic that draws the eye and evidences the key insight. I mean, I'm not the world's foremost expert in branding. There are other people out there with better knowledge than I have, but I've certainly seen far better return on investment with our posts when we're data-led rather than just entirely imagery-led, if that makes sense.
No, absolutely. And so in marketing in general, Leor, was there any moment where you've had an aha moment? This is something which has really worked, or something that's really stuck with any sort of golden nuggets of marketing information?
Yeah, maybe I'll give you an example. So I've used my planning approach, the Favourability Journey, over the years, but I've discovered that the most successful programs or campaigns, the ones with the best ROI, are the ones that really have a wow factor around some of the tactics. And I'll give you an example of where we did that really effectively. With one of the programs I was running a number of years ago, we looked at the demographics of the target market, and they were a particular role of individual chief financial officers in large companies. And we looked at their socioeconomic background and their personal interests. We wanted to talk about particular content we had on a topic, which we knew was relevant. So if you think back to my content tree, we knew the seeds really hit the client issue. But the problem was the market was saturated with content on this. It was a very particular issue around regulation a few years ago. I won't bore you with the detail. We needed a wow factor to get people in the room. And looking at the demographics of the target market, one of the things that stood out was their love for cricket, which is not a sport that I've ever played. I didn't grow up in a town or a school where cricket was the sport. So this wasn't my preference, but it was very much led by the demographics. So I booked the then England cricketing captain, Alistair Cook, to come to a dinner where we were going to talk about our research, but our research had a tinge of leadership around it, which was obviously his particular spike. And, you know, the first point is we invited 70 people for 50 places. 50 people turned up on the night, top tier potential clients. They stayed all the way throughout the evening, engaged thoroughly in the discussion, particularly when Alistair started speaking on leadership. And at the end of the night, I stood up and I said to the audience, if anyone would like a picture with Alistair, please come to the front of the room. And my chairman, who was sitting next to me, said, no, that's a bit crass. No one will want it. The moment he finished saying that to me, all 50 of these CFOs got up and ran to the front of the room, pushing past each other to get a picture of Alistair. So, you know, our content was what allowed us to contact them and was what we wanted to talk about. But to cut through the noise of all of our competitors talking about the same thing, we needed that wow factor. And for that demographic, the all-time run scorer England cricket captain certainly worked. It might not have been my thing, but it wasn't about me, it was about the clients. And that certainly worked to cut through the noise, as I say.
No, I absolutely think that's the key to marketing, isn't it? It's just understanding your customer and understanding where their eyeballs are, what their interests are, and then communicating like that with them. What tips would you give in marketing to small businesses?
I think the most important thing for me is always to think about your customer. To think about your customer when you're building your product, when you're putting your revenue model together, and importantly, of course, when you're doing your marketing. I mean, I've worked nearly all of my career in professional services, and there is a tendency for people to say, I know about professional service X. I am the world's foremost expert in service X. I will therefore talk about that service and hope that people come. And that sometimes works. I, as a marketeer, will always say, okay, I know you are the world's leading expert in X, but let's think about the client need. What situation do they find themselves in where our service will appeal to them? So what is our proposition? And that can sometimes be a difficult conversation to have, especially when you have people who are very eminent and very successful. Trying to go back to basics is sometimes a difficult thing to do. But it absolutely helps in terms of refining the marketing message and picking the right tactics. So that's the message I would give, whether you're thinking about marketing or about your products or about your overall operating structure. Put the customer, the client at the heart of everything you do. Don't just think about what widgets you have to sell. Think about what problem your clients have that they need widgets for to fix, if that makes sense.
It does. Oh, thank you so much. It's been some absolutely fascinating the information you've given. Very, very insightful. And I've certainly learned a lot. And I think business is mindset as well, to quite a great extent, actually, in how we think about things and how we process things and how we approach business. It's a way of thought that can be transformational. Tell me about, with the Favourability Journey, is that something that people can speak to you about, or is it through your company? What's the best way for people to actually read about it in a little more depth?
Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate the opportunity, David. I published a series of articles actually about the Favourability Journey, which are available online. If you were to Google the phrase Favourability Journey, they'll come up. Or alternatively, if you're on LinkedIn and you were to look up my profile, Leor Franks, you'll see them at the top of my profile. Happy to share with anyone who's interested. I think there's wide application across all industries. You know, I have to say there are plenty of other similar models out there. So it may not be about my model. It may just be about having a model, a structure, a process. If you come back to my earlier remarks about golf, you know, you can either chuck a whole bunch of balls on the terrace and whack them and see what happens, or you can have a more planned approach. So I think the important thing is to have that plan, whether you use my Favourability Journey or something out of a marketing textbook. You'll certainly see a lot more value if you plan, measure and monitor rather than just whacking balls off the terrace and hoping for the best.
Which actually brings me on to another point, which has just come to me, which you could use in that analogy, which I'm going to use going forward. And I do hope you you agree with me on this point. But lots of business owners, especially small business owners, family companies, they have a know-it-all culture. We know everything. We don't really need outside help. Occasionally, they do get it in. They certainly don't, or generally don't have a deep understanding of marketing. They have a surface level. But a lot of these people actually, they may be playing golf, and I put money on the fact they've been to the golf course and they've paid for lessons for a professional. Shouldn't they be doing the same in their professional lives and paying for a consultant in marketing or HR to come along and actually give them the benefit of their knowledge?
That's a really good question. I played a bit of golf when I was at university, and I had several friends who were just naturally talented. You could put a ball in front of them and they could drive straight onto the tee on a 300-yard hole.
Not fair.
Amazing. I mean, they never had any training. They never had any background. One of them didn't even own his own clubs. He just had that natural gift. And it's the same in business. There are some people who just get it. They know what clients want. They know how to put the product together. They know how to market it. And that's wonderful. And you see some of those people at the top of the Forbes rich list. And if everyone had that skill, there'd be no need for consultants. There'd be no need for in-house HR, marketing, operations departments or whatever. I, on the other hand, on a golf course, I don't have that natural skill. And I don't play regularly now, but I certainly did have lessons with a pro years back when I wanted to try and figure out how to, drive on a long hole, or how to, to get a ball out of the rough. So I needed that expertise. I needed that insight. And there are a lot of people out there who probably would really improve their game if they had a pro with them, giving them little tips as well as helping them with the overall strategy. So it depends where you are. If you've got the natural gift and you don't need any help, why bother bringing anyone in? But I think the vast majority of people would always benefit from having professional advice, whether it's an external consultant or an in-house specialist, to help them with all of their functional needs.
And also, I think it brings me on to another point, analogy that I can personally relate to, is that don't try and necessarily do things which you don't have an understanding of and you can't afford a consultant for. I'm going to bring this back to golf when I used to play, and we used to go away as a group of 20 every year. We play a championship course, and every year I would get the wooden spoon for the worst player, and I got thoroughly fed up of that, because you're in a group of lads, some ladies as well, and we all get our big drivers out and we whack it, and my ball's going left, right, and never ever centre. Absolute nightmare. So one year I find, you know what, I'm going to play with 3 clubs. I'm going to take a 5-iron, a pitching wedge, and the putter. And you know what? Unbeaten. I was player of the year, because I knew I could hit those clubs down the centre of the fairway onto the green and putt. So I actually took things back to basics and stopped trying to do things which I hadn't got the skill set to do, and I needed to learn more. And hopefully people can just see how that might, fit in terms of consultants and not doing things which you just haven't got the skill set to do, because invariably you're going to get it wrong.
Yeah, I think that's a really good story, David. And I was really empathizing with that until you talked about the fact you got to a point where you were winning, which has never been my story in golf. But I think one of the things to remember is, and I can only really talk about marketing and comms and BD, is, there is a downside to getting it wrong. There's risk. There's the potential to damage your brand, to waste money, and in some situations to break regulation. A while back, in a previous role, one of my internal clients was saying to me they had this great idea and they didn't need any help. And I said to them, what about GDPR, the data protection regulations? And they looked at me as if I just conjured up 4 random letters and stuck them together. And they said, look, I don't know anything about GDPR, but it doesn't matter. I'm going to go and do this. And I said to them, look, the tactics you're articulating are sensible based on the market, but we're going to get sued. And as someone who is responsible on the management team for our brand and risk around our reputation, I've got to ask you to hold on a second there, because if you do that and it goes wrong, we will be in a lot of trouble. And I certainly don't want to be in an organization that is breaching rules and getting things wrong and losing huge amounts of money simply because we couldn't be bothered to pause, understand the rules and do it properly. So for people listening to this and thinking, oh, I can just, I can put the balls on the clubhouse terrace and bang them around and hope for the best. In some situations you can, but you don't know what you don't know. There are rules, regulations, and risks out there. And sometimes asking for professional input is the only way of ensuring that your great idea isn't going to get you a huge bill at the end of the day.
Absolutely. I think we should point out, we've actually have a video on GDPR, speaking with an expert. I'm discussing lots of things, and my bet is that most small to medium-sized businesses are actually not compliant with GDPR, especially with Brexit, and even on their laptops. It's surprising the rules and regulations there are, and it is definitely worth speaking to an expert to ensure that you are fully compliant. Leor, thank you very, very much indeed for your insightful knowledge. And really, everyone go to Leor's LinkedIn profile. I'm going to give the address below, and also you see it on the screen here. Please go there, read about it more. And Leor, thank you very much indeed.